Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast.
Today, our special guest is John Lind, who is the Senior Vice President of Aspen Power. How's it going, John?
Going well, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Great. So what's up over there at Aspen Power? I guess Aspen is a tree, it's a ski resort, and it's a power place.
It's all those things, yes. Primarily driven out of the fact that our CEO lives in Aspen, Colorado.
Great.
Not unusual.
So you're not like chopping down and clear cutting aspen forests and then putting them into some kind of thing to make energy that way, I guess? That's probably not the idea.
I can't commit to this, Sean. If there's a project to be, cut those trees down.
All right. Yeah, I guess, it's like, I remember seeing like there were some people that had these backwoods power facilities and they would burn wood and make electricity from it. And so, Hey, is that renewable? I don't know. But you're probably not burning aspen trees. That's just kind of what I'm guessing.
No, but there is that interesting story about, and we weren't a part of this, and this was some years ago, about a data center that one of the tech firms built. I forget exactly what state, but it was mid-Atlantic. And they wanted to do a ground mount solar array. And in order to do that, they had to clear cut about 50 acres of trees to install solar. Is that renewable?
Yeah, I guess there's every different kind of argument. One of the weird metrics that I've seen before too is like some inverters, I don't know if they still do it. It's like they tell you how many trees you saved, because trees take CO2 out of the atmosphere and all that kind of stuff. And so it was funny, there was some kind of ratio of how many trees you cut down to save how many trees. And so if you cut down 2 trees, maybe you saved 20 or 200 or something like that. And so you want to save the planet, you got to cut down the trees shading your solar. I don't know, it's just kind of ironic.
Yeah, that's right. Uh-huh. But, I think that where we're trending here is an interesting point, I think, because historically, our industry, I don't think, has done a great job of kind of branding or marketing it itself. And I remember a funny story. Well, I thought it was funny, but my first solar meeting in 2010 when I got started in the industry. And I went to a real estate conference, and I met with my first real estate customer. And our presentation was just chock full of all those things. How many trees you're saving, how many cars are coming off the road, all those nice, renewable sustainability pieces. And he immediately looked at me and he said, and I'll censor this, but he said, I don't care, what's the return? And that resonated from the get-go. And clearly we had to rush back to the office and completely redo our materials. But point being, like, the decision is clearly not made from a sustainability or renewable energy standpoint. It's not. Maybe there's some interest driven by that, and that ebbs and flows, quite honestly, depending on the administration. But it's always been a way for financial benefit, right?
Yeah, I think they said like some of the early adopters, people getting into solar around the year 2000, where the return on investment was terrible. It was like solar, it was like 10 times longer than it is now. It'd be like 100 years or something like that in some cases. Yeah. And those early adopters, those were the ones that, didn't care about the return on investment and all that kind of stuff. But those people, they got solar a long time ago. Now people want to make saving the planet kind of secondary to saving money. I mean, a lot of people think like one person doesn't make a difference, but that's a good thing about what we're doing is we brought the price down so much that it's cheaper than all those dirty types of electricity, even burning aspen trees.
Yes. Uh-huh. Well, it's true. And also, I'm in the C&I space, commercial and industrial. It's basically commercial buildings and our counterparties are commercial entities for the most part. And it's distributed generation, right? So we're putting power, electricity generation at the point or near where it's being consumed, right? So we're interconnecting at the distribution network, not the transmission network. And the argument that, my one building's not going to make a difference, in and of itself, no. However, there are, I don't know, I'm guessing how many tens of hundreds of thousands of buildings, millions of buildings in the country. And if some percent of them do that, then yes, it does make a difference, right? Mm. So, the difference between like utility scale, which would be, into transmission networks and, 50, 100, 200 megawatts in the desert type thing.
Yeah, I always thought it would be kind of interesting to have a metric of how it does do something. Like you could take a single solar module and install it and figure out how much lower the sea level is going to be. And it might be something like 10 to the minus 20 meters or something like that. But you could make a number, I mean, it's just like one solar module keeping the sea level from rising 10 to the negative 20th meters or something like that, I thought that would be kind of fun.
Yeah. And needless to say, our presentations now don't have any of that. It's all cash flows and returns and, savings on their electric with a PPA or a hedge against future energy price increases, with an inflation cap on our PPA rate, things of that nature.
Yeah, and I think too that people that care about all that kind of stuff like climate change, saving the environment, you don't have to sell them on anything. It's like they already have solar. They already made their mind up. They might be, more looking at their next system that they're going to get.
Yeah, and on the corporate side, the big ESG push did garner interest and more interest in firms, whether it be real estate investors or corporates, in looking at the multitude of ways in which they can bring more efficiency and sustainability into their business. But again, the decision ultimately was never made on that premise. It was always made on, what's the savings, what's the return, what's the rent you're going to pay me, et cetera.
Yep.
And so I think that goes back to my point about branding. Like, we are in a lot of ways an investment vehicle, right? In either side, whether you're the customer or you're whether Aspen and IPP, right?
Independent power producer.
Correct. Our industry loves its acronyms, and there's a whole host that are defined differently depending on who you talk to. But so we're looking at cash flows and returns and how we're going to finance it and monetize the tax benefits and things like that. And the customer is looking at it from their perspective, saving money, like I said, or, earning a new rent on their roofs, that type of thing. But that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And I think, how if we had branded that way earlier, I think we probably would have, I believe my hypothesis is that we would have avoided a lot of the gyrations we see every time a new administration comes in. Mm-hmm. Because there's no fundamental reason to be against what we're doing, really, right? We're creating more generation capacity in the market one way or another. For distributed generation, which again, we're putting it at a place that power is being consumed. So you don't have transmission problems and losses and infrastructure enhancements from that standpoint. But I think that would have been good if we had changed our tune a little bit earlier.
Yeah, it's like, I guess, guilting people into, getting solar is it's a little bit difficult. Yeah.
And when I'm talking to like a CFO or an asset manager at a property, like you're not going to bully them into doing something if this doesn't make financial sense to them.
So I was just thinking too, like, doing C&I, commercial and industrial solar. And with residential, a lot of times in places, it depends on where you are, you need some energy storage because you're not getting the full credit for exporting. But it's possible too with commercial and industrial that your systems aren't going to be offsetting the whole bill. There's only so much roof space and there's a big bill. So you're going to be perhaps in those cases exporting a lot less. Therefore, you don't need to invest in an energy storage system and you could get a faster ROI, return on investment. Are you seeing that?
Well, we're seeing it for another reason. And if the question is really on PV and battery storage systems being more integrated. Because you're right, PV standalone. I was talking to someone in the industry the other day and they were like, standalone PV is dead. And I thought that was a bit extreme, but I think the message is we'll need to adapt. Yeah, and we should. And we should always be. Standalone PV will continue to exist and open markets. That's, the best path. And customers where that's the best path. But what we are seeing more of is battery storage integration. And I would say over the last, say 6 months when the big beautiful bill, hit. And it's in certain markets. The reason being because it's value enhancing, right? In one way or another. And you pointed to like the solar is offsetting your variable charges, bringing in battery for the most part, bringing in battery, now we're hitting the entire bill and we can do a lot of cool stuff with it, right? peak demand shading, frequency regulation, a whole bunch of things that are potentially new revenue streams, in actuality, new revenue streams in many markets. But also, I think the messaging going forward will be more around taking more control, having a building owner and a meter owner having more control over their power, right? When they use it on site, when they store it, when they release it for maximum benefit on their standpoint. But also resiliency is also going to be a component of that. And I believe we'll hear more and more of that. We are starting to around microgrid and say a building's true ability to be off grid if the grid's down. So things like that. I kind of jumped to the future state, but.
So you're in New York City, the owner of the company or the CEO's in Aspen, Colorado, up there where all the skiers hang out. Where are your jobs? Are they all over the place?
They are. We're concentrated in New York City, so we have about total of 70 staff. I would say somewhere in the area of like 30 are permanently here in New York. That's where we have, various functions around O&M or asset management, engineering, all components of the process. And then we have project managers and other folks that are out in the field. So the balance of the company is out in the field at any given time. We are national, so they're all across the country, with specific projects that they're managing.
So being in New York City, does that mean your jobs are there in New York City? That's one of the most developed places in the world. So the rooftops are kind of high. Yeah.
Not a great, Manhattan in particular, not a great solar market. Although I live in Manhattan and there's a building next door to mine that I can see that does have a solar array, on its roof. I don't know how much it's really doing for the building, probably some elevator and maybe lobby lights, but nonetheless, it can be done, but it's expensive for those reasons that we kind of mentioned. But your outer boroughs are good, battery's good, in Con Ed territory, which also expands into Westchester. And as you get north of the city, upstate New York, we've done a bunch of solar projects up there. They're thin generally because rates are lower, but a lot of community solar, which is another component of our business here at Aspen. And by that, we mean kind of those ground mount arrays, which can be larger, around 5 megawatts. And they're truly just, backfeeding everything into the grid and selling it to the community.
Okay. Yeah. We recently had somebody on from Brooklyn Solar Canopies. Are you familiar with them?
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, they make some racks that are made for going on the tall buildings, jacking them up over air conditioning systems and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and we do, along those lines, roofs, parking lots. I'm a proponent that every parking lot should have, solar arrays on it for the very reason that if for no other reason, it creates shaded parking.
Yeah.
And why not, generate some electricity from it too? There's some issues with that. They're more costly with the steel, and in many cases, there's no specific incentive to do it from the, local or state or utility programs. But we have done a lot of those, and I like them. Parking decks as well, love that. But roofs, are kind of bread and butter, but also some ground mount if there's some excess land. But yeah, it runs the gauntlet. And for a firm like ours, I think it's important to be, pretty flexible in the way that we operate to an extent, because we're really looking at what are the customer's goals and objectives? What are they trying to achieve? And beyond that, what can be done at their facility in that market? So it's a whole kind of strategy discussion that takes input from them clearly on what they're trying to achieve, and then flexibility on our part to be able to provide it.
I remember a study, I think it was even in Solar Pro magazine, where somebody was trying to make a value for the shading of your cars in a carport. I think maybe they figured that, there's a certain price per watt for the PV. I've even seen like some carport companies like, you want to get a carport? You want to pay for it by price per watt, price per parking spot, all these different ways to pay for it. And then perhaps the parking lot owner could charge more for shaded parking. And then you also have an EV hookup there, easy to do. And then you just take that sunlight, put it right into the car.
Yes, that's true. I have heard customers are always getting premium pricing for their parking if it's under a canopy or shaded. It's easier to install EV charging because we're already running electric out. So that's just usually gets coupled with EV charging for what that's worth, but also advertising, on the structure, the PV structure itself, and selling advertising space. So, for the landlord or the building owner, there could be some creative things they could do with that.
Yeah, and they look green, so people kind of like that. And I assume too that, if you talk about like Phoenix, Arizona or something like that, the primary reason for a carport is, to shade your car for the heat. But if you're out there in New York City or someplace and out that way, you have other reasons too, besides heat in the summer. I mean, it does get hot in the summer, but you will have, snow that gets up there or rain or something like that. And I know that it's not too common, but some carports will actually, prevent rain from going in between the solar modules. Do you see very much of that?
We get all those kind of questions and things we need to address also for runoff, things like that. And so there is a big water management study component to carports. That said, yes, there's a lot of add-ons. So normally the way we lead is kind of with and no offense to any automakers, but we lead with more like a Toyota, right? Like here's the cost-effective Toyota that's going to have, some permeability between the modules and things like that. So it's not fully, from a precipitation perspective, it's not, full coverage. There is some, obviously. But there are, we can then add on and have it be impermeable, and then bring in water management would be gutter systems, and then study where that water is going to be going and that type of thing. And lead towards more of a kind of like a Rolls-Royce option for your canopy. And we get, comments around coloring and paint and all kinds of things that, can be added on if a customer wants. But yeah.
I can remember maybe like 15 years ago, there were people that were looking at carports, and they weren't calling them carports because they wanted to get the 30% tax credit. And they were calling them solar support structures. And if you said carport, they'd be like, no, solar support structure. And if you made it so the water couldn't go between the modules, they said that made it so it was a carport and it wasn't just a solar support structure. So some people would get it all signed off, and then they would stick some kind of corrugated plastic under it after the job was all signed off, so that way they could get the tax credit. Do you see any of that? Or, what's your opinion, or what are you seeing happening with tax credits? And I know that some of the tax credits are running out soon, but the other ones are going to, sticking around for a little while.
Yeah, the battery ones will stick around a little while.
Yeah, and the ones that are owned by a company, like PPAs and leases and all that.
No, we have a step down.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, there may be a component of the industry that has a little more runway, but battery is it. And for us, we sunset. So partly why the whole industry is a bit crazy at the moment is because, we're gunning to get projects that we have in our pipeline done before, July 2026. We had to start construction, quote unquote. And there's ways in which to do that to qualify, but start construction by then or finish by the end of 27. So that's what we need to adhere to on the schedule side. Now, there are ways to do safe harboring, through the purchase of and allocation of a certain amount of equipment, modules, typically, sometimes inverters, that, folks like us will buy in bulk and warehouse it and assign it to projects. And then you can be safe harbored and have more time, and give yourself another like 4 years to finish the project. So I think the takeaway here is that we're on a schedule. There are ways in which, we can meet those schedules or extend the timeline, but it's all very complicated and difficult. And it's not the first time this industry's gone through it. Like I said, I've been doing this for 15 years. This is probably the third or fourth time, we've had some sort of significant change in the federal tax credit.
Yeah. So maybe you could go over that again too. So you had some July 26 deadline, then end of 27 deadline, and then something else with safe harbor that it was like 4 years later.
Yeah, and there's nuances to that, right? So like if we start construction by July next year, we have 4 years to hit commercial operation date, right? Like we have more runway.
So if you do it by July of 26, then 4 years after July of 26 is July of 2030, and they could still be getting the tax credits?
Yeah.
Wow.
And to tax credit. Yeah, you have to finish in that time.
So that's like finishing a job, and they'll be like a different president, and they might change their mind on tax credits. And I can remember back in the earlier days, and the 2008 and 9 era, they were just renewing it every year. So somebody might just renew it. Maybe even Trump will renew it. Who knows? He's famous for changing his mind on stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's a long time away.
It is, but you have to start construction by then. And so to start construction, you need all of your interconnection approved, you need permits in hand, need contracts with the customer, final, you need everything, all the boxes checked, to really start construction. Now, there are ways in which you can do that without those things. Let's say it's a parking lot canopy, for example. You might in advance go out and do trenching, even pour the footings, enough to achieve it's 5% or more of the total project cost, right? So if you do enough work on site that can be considered, and you would have lawyers involved to make sure that you're adhering to the guidance that, Treasury has provided around this and the rules and regulations to qualify. But yes, you can do that, and folks will do that, to start construction, quote unquote, which is why I put it in quotes. But yeah, so you have that timeline. So it's a real pressure to get your projects figured out. Like, how are they going to slot? Are you going to safe harbor, start construction, not start construction, but finish by the end of 27? That's the other approach, and still retain the tax credit. So yeah, the long and the short of it, it's complicated, and you really have to pick your horses as far as projects are concerned, and which ones, you're going to slot into these different strategies to retain the tax credit, which is partly why, personally, I'm not sad to see it go. I'd like it to go away. And it was always intended to go away. And the reason why I like it is it's going to force us as an industry to get more creative and to look at other types of technologies or other approaches to our business. And that, I mean, some of the things we talked about around resiliency, around batteries, around, different markets and different types of projects. But your other point is right. Policy could change again, between now and then. We also have some other headwinds around, fiat requirements, basically where we're getting, either components or materials from.
Like they have to be shipped on a fiat, like the kind of car, is that it? For an entity of concern, I guess, is that?
Yeah. Uh-huh. It might sound silly, but I could see the requirement. Yes, we have fiats. Yeah, but basically where we're getting our materials from, and if it's from an entity of concern as defined by the Fed, then we'd lose the tax credit.
Man, does that mean I have to stop buying my solar equipment from Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, probably.
I better go cancel that order. Yeah.
But, what's interesting, as far as I know, and there's more guidance to come in, I'm by no means an expert in that, but there is a point at which you could look to see how much lower is the cost of these, non-fiat requirements. And if it's low enough, you would do compared to what your benefits you're getting from the ITC, you might go that way anyway. So it's an interesting analysis to see, okay, at what point does it's okay that we're not qualifying for it because net we're better off anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it before on the podcast a number of times. It's there's pluses and minuses to the tax credit. And the plus is pretty obvious. You get this big old tax credit. But there's lots of minuses. It's you have to be working with these, jumping through loopholes. And sometimes people are putting PV modules on a truck and changing warehouses. Just dealing with all this stuff, and then somebody's got to make the money, and it's might be some kind of, or use it, somebody that owes taxes, and it might be just some kind of Wall Street firm, and they're going to want a big, a nice piece of the action, and it just changes things around so much. And now that solar has gone down in price so much, there is an argument, like you said, for, not having to deal with all the paperwork.
Yeah, and that on the financing end, it's another layer of complexity, right? We need tax equity investors, to help monetize those tax benefits. And that's a whole nother party you're bringing into the equation, and there's a cost to that. So, once you strip out the ITC, there is more efficiency, there is lower costs in some areas, right? But it also changed the states in which we can operate, right? For at least the kind of short to midterm, right? And maybe change the approach from things, and I'm just kind of spitballing a little bit, but, maybe less community solar as it relates to C&I and more power purchase agreements, which I'm a fan of. And I think, with rising rates, particularly in California, that doesn't have a community solar market, It's been a bit ignored, and I think there's huge opportunity there. We've started doing a bunch of projects in California with PPAs, some with battery. That look good. Like we can do that. And, California itself is a giant market. So, and it also, one of the oldest markets. So there's some limitations there. But yeah, and that's an example. Or Illinois that has some really good battery rebates, when coupled with PV, it makes a nice system. So less community solar. There is a community solar potential there, but not great for C&I. But, behind the meter PPA and battery, yeah, looks like a good project in Illinois, for example.
Great.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show.
So back to my comment about, carports. Do you get the full tax credit these days if you call it a carport and you don't say that it's a racking system or a solar support structure?
Yeah, you do.
Okay. They don't try to take out that value of your cooler car in Phoenix because that's not a solar. Well, I guess maybe shading is a solar value. It's like if you're shading your car, you're going to need to use less electricity to keep it cool.
Right.
Or gasoline.
Heat island effect also gets, kind of positively impacted, right? Instead of heating up a bunch of asphalt, now we're cool, we're keeping it, ambient temperature.
Taking that energy from the sun and just sending it down those lines.
Right. Yeah. Now it'd be great if we could stick a couple of plugs in an asphalt parking lot and just have it do its thing and generate energy from it. But I don't think technologically we're there yet.
Oh yeah, I'm working on that. I'll have that done by next week. Yeah. All right, great. Well, let's see. Are there other things that you want to talk about?
Well, yeah, we didn't talk, in that equation also is tariffs, right? So we have the ITC that we talked about, with the compliance, which we talked about, and we have tariffs, which are, for right now, raising prices, right? For modules, there's a couple of reasons why that's going up, but other types of equipment as well. And also lead time to get equipment. So transformer seems to be a big thing, meaning there's a supply-demand imbalance. And having
hard to get,
and takes a lot of time. And these projects, they can take from customer says, yeah, let's go do it, to actually starting construction or then building the project. It could be 12 on a fast track, but more likely 24 36 months, which is a long time. And in that time, the market changes. So what you told the customer 3 years ago is going to be a different case now. And it might not mean I need to explain anything to the customer, but it might also mean that I do. So it's really hard from that perspective, just how much time.
I'm wondering why with transformers, it's not more like supply and demand, like a market. Like if they're hard to get, they can charge double. And if they're still hard to get, they charge triple. And at some point, you'll be able to get them sooner rather than just you always have to wait for years. Do you have any idea on why that is? I'm not saying that they should do it that way, but it also might, if the transformers were more expensive, then they would have more transformer factories.
Yes, that's a good point. And I think we will. I think it's a case of how long it takes the, that market to build the capacity to satisfy, the market or, the demand, and honestly, we have across the board haven't been so great about, being quick and nimble to address, market constraints. And by that, I mean construct factories to actually start producing things domestically. And I was reading an article earlier, across the board, whether that be building bridges or buildings, or I live in New York, there's about a half a dozen or more projects that I could point to that have taken, 60 years and are still not, started construction. So Penn Station is a great example. So yeah, we need to get better just across the board on building things. And that's what we're doing. That's what a solar project is. We talked about an investment vehicle. We're building something, It's a construction project like any other. We go through the same permitting. Interconnection is the same if you're building a building or a solar project. And then getting out there, getting the equipment and building the project. Like, it should happen a whole lot faster than it is. But some of the constraints we talked about, interconnection constraints, there's one we haven't, but it's very similar there in most markets where it's taking, years to go through studies all along the way, making hard money deposits, for additional studies, only to find out at the other end that, it's going to cost you $1.5 million in upgrade costs to interconnect your project. If it's a big project, maybe you could absorb it, but most projects can't. So then you just wasted all that time on something that's not going to go. So like either better transparency or communication or information from the utilities would be really helpful. Also, some of the investments on their part, instead of laying all those upgrade costs onto the developers or the projects themselves, a whole host of things.
Yeah, I kind of think that the upgrade, especially like for, distributed generation, rooftop solar, residential, C&I and all that kind of stuff, is way over exaggerated. If anything, putting solar on your building is going to reduce the amount of electricity your building needs rather than needing to increase the size of those wires. It's almost like they're forgetting that instead of subtracting your solar from your loads, what they're doing is they're adding them together.
Yeah.
And so maybe what we should do is when you get solar, you should decrease your transformer size, especially solar and storage. They should come out there and take that transformer and bring it somewhere else because you don't need such a big transformer when you're making your own electricity.
Yeah, no, I agree. They look at it as a worst case scenario. What happens if, there's no consumption on the site and you're net metering everything onto the grid? And that's battery inclusive. And also, there's a whole host of potential reasons around, are we like somehow impeding, or stepping on their business? I don't really think so at all. I think there's more benefits to having distributed generation than negatives, but also, they lay costs off onto the ratepayers, so there's some constraints there about, their ability to do capital improvements to the grid because, they have to get regulatory approval for rate increases and things like that. So they also get a guaranteed 10% return. So I don't know. And I would think they would do more, they being utilities, more of the upgrade work in themselves if they're getting a guaranteed 10% return on their investments. But it is a bit nebulous. I can't say I have the answer to that.
Yeah, it's just like certain entities like control. And if you're going to be controlling your own electricity, that's like, getting rid of that control and, but to me, it just doesn't make sense at all. Like from a logic point of view, that if you're making your own electricity, you need to have more infrastructure between you and the grid. You should need less.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, a bit of a shout out to the folks that work at utilities, because I know they're overworked, they're understaffed, and our volume.
And they need raises. We need to have
They need raises. They do. So I feel for the folks that are trying to crank through all the stuff we're submitting. Is by no means.
They probably have like terrible coffee too. They probably have like, one of those cans of coffee or whatever.
Oh, it must be horrible. Yeah.
Get grounds in a can.
Or you remember the Nescafe, like coin-operated machines where they would get a coffee back in the day. Remember those things?
Yeah. I remember that from college. Yeah, you stick in a quarter or something.
Yeah. It's got awful coffee.
Yeah, we need to get those utilities to give their employees dark roast, and then they would probably understand that you don't need to upgrade the infrastructure when you're making your own electricity.
I like it. We should try this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll send them some of those Keurigs over their way when we're trying to make a deal. Yeah.
Well, now I know my Christmas gift to my utility friends.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. All right. Well, very cool. Let's see. Any other stuff you want to talk about?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up because I saw that I think you like sayings or something. So I came up with triple squeeze is where we are at the moment in the industry. And that's the tax credits we talked about, fiat restrictions that we talked about, and tariff. Those are triple squeeze items.
Okay. Great. Awesome. Well, that sounds like we're going to start putting that in the textbooks.
Yeah. Solar industry under triple squeeze threat.
Oh, yeah. We can handle it. They're just threatened by us because we've gone from alternative energy to mainstream, and it's changing their business model faster than they know how to react.
Yeah.
And it's because of our success and the prices of all the equipment, no matter where it makes, is so much lower than it used to be, no matter where they make it. So we've been successful. Congratulations.
Yeah, and I also find it really interesting that, just people think, oh, it's the blue states that are, really pushing the renewables and all that kind of stuff. Yet, interestingly enough, one of the biggest users or deployment of wind and solar has been Texas.
Yeehaw. Yeah. Yeah, they're catching up to California, as for like cumulative installed, and I think they're number one for, year by year lately. And I can remember when Texas wasn't even on the list.
Not even on the list. Yeah, they've done a lot. Kudos to them. And a lot of battery, grid-tied battery.
Yeah. What do you know? Like Texas and then China, they install like half the world's solar or something like that. So
yeah, I saw that number. It was outstanding.
Yeah.
It's tremendous deployment. But they are taking a pretty strong, all of the above approach, which I think makes a lot of sense.
I remember sitting by a guy at a conference in China, and he was talking like a gigawatt was small. So, it's only 1,000 megawatts.
Right. Come on.
Yeah.
We think that way of anything less in the C&I space of less than 1 megawatt is in time and effort.
Yeah. Not too long ago, or, as far as like a decade or two ago, like putting a megawatt on a building would have been like front page news. So
we would have had a parade.
Yeah. We should go have a parade right now just because of all the great stuff that's happening in the industry.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for your positive attitude and all the great things that you talked about. And we want to send some people to you. So where do they find out about you and Aspen Power so they can do some business with you?
Yeah, sure. Our website is just aspenpower.com. I can be reached jlind, LIND, at aspenpower.com.
Great.
Or via LinkedIn. You look me up.
Great. Yep. I'm looking at your LinkedIn right now. And so thank you so much, John Lind, Senior Vice President of Aspen Power. And thanks for listening to Shawn White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Make sure to go to SolarSEAN.com and figure out where you can get your solar education so you can up your game, so you can get NABCEP certified, and so you could be super, super smart. Ow!